I hope she is tormented by it. I hope that she finds that she thinks about it and that she realises what she has done, because I don't think she does. I don't think there's a recognition by Lucy Letby of the magnitude of what she has done. She is someone who won't even face the verdict of what she has done. She's someone who has made clear that on Monday she will not be in court for those victim impact statements, for the families to say the hell that they have been through. These tiny babies. There was one family interviewed, I saw them interviewed last night. They thought they couldn't have children. Then they had twins, and the twins were murdered by Lucy Letby. Absolutely horrendous. Awful, awful crimes. Why do people do it? Do they have a reason? Is it just because they're bad people? Lucy Beresford is a psychotherapist and broadcaster and is with me now. Lucy, you're very welcome to talkTV. This is just a horrendous case. What are your sort of initial observations of, perhaps we'll talk about Lucy Letby in a minute, but in terms of how the public is reacting to this? You've heard, I'm sure, and seen a lot of reaction to this over the past 24 hours or so, and indeed during the trial and so on. The public are, certainly the people I'm speaking to, are very, very sort of disbelieving of this. They're struggling to take in the magnitude of what happened.
I think the preeminent observation would be around how people are trying to understand how another human being could do such atrocious and horrendous crimes. And one of the ways in which we have seen people try to cope with this is to label this person as evil, as if somehow that turns her into a totally different category of human being. And what we have to recognize is that, very sadly, pure evil is a construct. And what we're really talking about here is a very damaged and very flawed individual who committed the most despicable and horrendous crimes, but is still a human being, and who still had her own issues, her own damage. Her own writing spoke of how she felt very unworthy, unlovable. She didn't think she'd ever get married or have children. And so what I've seen in the wider commentary is an attempt to turn her into this non-human being, which then almost absolves her of that, or rather it absolves us of thinking that human beings are capable of that. But the problem is that human beings are capable of such despicable cruelty. And that's why, as you say, we have a justice system which may on Monday mean that she ends up spending the rest of her life in prison or in some kind of mental health facility.
Surely it makes sense logically for people to use those words like evil and monster, because they don't want to suggest in any way that they have any connection to someone like Lucy Letby, that there is anything that they share that Lucy Letby shares.
That's right. It's our way of protecting ourselves from our really most primitive feelings, behaviours and desires. And that's not to say that any of us really are capable of some of that behaviour, but what it does is, and it's a very natural human protective mechanism, to say all of the evil is taking place over there and the rest of us are living over here. And what we have to recognise is that uncomfortable pain, and I suppose evil, if you're using that word, operates within all of us to some degree. And that's what's so scary, I think, for parents in particular. And my heart goes out to the parents who have not only lost the babies who were murdered, but also the parents who are living with babies who have been physically still affected by what Lucy Letby did to them, but also the hundreds and thousands of parents-to-be who are in a very vulnerable position, who are going into hospitals even as we speak, perhaps about to have a baby or to have scans, to go through that process, and who are thinking, who can I trust? Yeah. Who can I actually place my trust in at my most vulnerable moment? And we have to recognise, as the managers at that hospital clearly didn't, is that you have to be very careful and balanced about who you put your trust in, and to recognise that it could be anybody, which is not to say that any of us would do it, but you have to recognise that other human beings are capable of really despicable crimes.
Even people who send nice cards, sympathy cards, even people who try to insert themselves into the process as well. I find that very interesting from a sort of from the perspective of the killer of Lucy, Lucy Letby, in terms of what she did. She tried to sort of almost in a weird way take credit for what she was doing. Is that what was going on here, in terms of trying to contact the families, in terms of what she was doing, in terms of being there for people and doing these extra shifts and being a sort of a martyr? I just think there's so many questions on in terms of why anybody would do this and how she acted. What do you make of what has been put in the public domain in terms of how she acted, not just the murders themselves, but the behaviour around that? Because there are so many baffling aspects of this.
I think it's the behaviour around it which will perhaps in the end be the most illuminating, because the murders themselves are atrocious. But around that was quite a complicated pattern around being in control, being super powerful, that you were in charge of whether this baby lived or died, but also inserting yourself into the narrative at every stage. As you say, perhaps befriending the grieving parents, keeping a lock of hair, writing about it when you're back at home, taking case notes home. We are led to understand that as a result of this trial, that she was perhaps either in a relationship or infatuated with a colleague, and that somehow part of her fantasy was that this person would be called on to, he would be called back to the hospital to help during one of these crises, and that the two of them would bond and form a relationship by rescuing these babies together. So there's a lot there around her attempts to create a narrative for herself about being a rescuer, about being powerful, about being admired. Because as you say, yes, there were colleagues who would say to her, well, goodness me, you've been around a lot of these deaths. Are you sure you don't want to have time off? And she'd be like, no, I'm coming back onto my shift tomorrow. So a really sort of noble, how amazing am I? But what that speaks to is a really, really deep-seated insecurity. Her writings around not thinking that she would ever get married or have children, that she wasn't worthy. She is very in touch, one might say, with who she is and how she operates. And I think the fact that she didn't want to come back to the court and doesn't perhaps want to be present when the sentencing is read out speaks not to someone who is callous and uncompassionate, but someone who really, really is in touch with the enormity of what she's done. And she can't face that. She cannot really own what she has actually done and perpetrated. You
raised a really good point there, Lucy, earlier in regard to families who are dealing with children who didn't die, who were attacked by Lucy Letby but didn't die. Many of them, I was watching one family last night talk about the complex needs that their child now has because of what happened, the disabilities that they have, the psychological impact on the families, and indeed on the jurors as well, who've listened to all of this for such a long time. I mean, that can't be counted, can it? That can't be quantified.
Unfortunately, there are very many more, one might say, victims of this particular situation. I'm thinking, as you say, not just of the parents who've lost children, lost babies who were murdered, but also the parents of children who lived but whose health is compromised. The members of staff who flagged this up really early on and were not only not listened to, but were actually made to jump through hoops to apologise to Lucy and to go to mediation and to write a letter of apology. And also the other colleagues who work in that hospital. And as I say, people who are going through pregnancy now, who are thinking, how does this impact on my care? And dare I say, also Lucy's parents, who have lost their daughter, who have had to come to terms with the most horrific elements of their daughter's behaviour. All of these people are going to be suffering to some degree. Now, on Monday, when the judgment is given in terms of what the sentencing is, there will be some element of closure for some of these people in the sense of justice having been done, having been seen to be done, leaving aside the fact that there are clearly really serious questions to be asked at the hospital itself. But for many of these people, that pain may never heal,
Yeah.
or it will shapeshift in some way. And that's where our hearts should be, with the people who have really had their lives turned upside down and changed forever. And that pain won't ever go away. It will change, but it will be part of their lives forever.
Okay.
And that is a shame.